And now, to our last speaker for this session. Do you need anything? Oh, okay. Yeah, well then.
You can leave the mountains if you want. Yeah, sure.
Okay, our last speaker is Alexis Kallio from the Sibelius Academy in Music Education there. She's just recently, how many weeks ago, defended her PhD. A month.
A month today.
A month.
Yay.
Exactly a month. And defended it successfully. So, yes, she'll be talking about the politics of music education to some extent at least. Yeah, so please.
So my presentation today is predominantly theoretical, but I do have a couple of examples from my doctoral research, in which I combined the fields of music education with cultural criminology, which seems really weird, and it is, but it works for me. I have a background in criminology, at least academic-wise as well, which is why I feel at home in between two very distant academic worlds. So in my research, at least the cultural criminology part, I've drawn themes of social censure, which is what I'm talking a bit about today, and censorship. And I looked at that with 5 Finnish secondary school teachers in terms of how they choose which popular repertoire to teach in their classrooms, and more interestingly to me, what they choose not to teach. So my presentation today is called Whose Culture Counts, as you can see in your programs. And this is a not so subtle reappropriation of the 2010 book Culture Counts by philosopher Roger Scruton, whose writings I generally disagree with pretty strongly. Scruton, together with scholars such as Alan Bloom, author of The Closing of the American Mind, and E.D. Hirsch Jr., led educational theory in the 1970s and 80s. And these scholars shared acute fears over young people's engagement with music. Bloom lamented that classical music is dead among the young, and worried that teenagers' minds, via headphones, were being filled with the sex, rebellion, homosexuality, drug use, nihilism, sexism, racism, and violence of popular music. Scruton warned that this unfounding popular culture idealized immaturity and interfered with the ability of young people to pay critical attention to these licentious messages and transition out of adolescence. So the purpose of school education was sort of to act as cultural antidote by inducting students into a high art canon, a shared reservoir of the greatest cultural achievements and knowledge that has stood the test of time. These masterworks generally represented a fairly narrow selection of Western art musics. And although these discussions took place in the 1970s and 80s in America and the United Kingdom, they're still very much relevant. Indeed, a couple of years back, Finnish music teachers and university teacher educators were accused of ruining the taste of the Finnish public, which resulted in the monster metal band Lordi representing us in the Eurovision Song Contest. And so as student populations have diversified, it has been argued that music education is no longer able to promote a singular musical truth or good through exclusive focus on any one music. There is no shared reservoir of cultural heritage. As classrooms are recognised as multicultural, it has also been recognised that they should be seen as multi-musical. In accordance with this plurality of cultures in the classroom, Zygmunt Bauman has suggested that this extends to values and moralities. In this way, he's envisioned our world as post-ethical. By this, an ethical framework as a fixed set of values that sets good and evil apart once and for all and for everybody is impossible. This is in line with correctives to Scruton, Bloom and Hirsch's view of music education that heralded one music and one set of values as the best, the true and the good. In such a multicultural, multi-musical, diverse and fast-changing world, it seems commonsensical that we all value different musics at different times, depending on context. In this way, there are a plurality of goods, also musical goods. This also means that there are differing ideas of what is offensive or what is problematic, raising new challenges for teachers, as one of the research participants in my doctoral research explained. As schools have become more and more multicultural, where are the boundaries of sensitive traditions and topics? It becomes even more difficult all the time for us teachers to even recognise which topics are sensitive. If music is understood not as an artefact that we consume, but by a means through which we construct ourselves and each other and others, this is important. By legitimising one music through allowing its inclusion as part of schoolwork, for example, certain values, beliefs and goods are legitimised, and others are marginalised. Music education in this way is always inclusive of somebody and exclusive of somebody else. And the moral process of deciding whose good counts when is complex and requires significant reflection on behalf of the teacher. As another teacher I interviewed emphasised, I think it's very important that I'm aware of my own ethical and moral principles, because they always affect how I see things and how I respond to questions. I always, time after time, question myself and my own principles. These deliberations are especially pertinent in public schooling systems that are designed to serve everyone. In these contexts, music education is thought to be democratic, allowing the participation of all students. So whose culture counts? Perhaps my interests are more centred on whose does not count. And although my research looked particularly at popular music, the sex and the drugs of rock and roll in the classroom, these questions are also relevant for any music positioned as other in any educational context. These sort of problems were also raised by the teachers that I interviewed, as they reflected on the importance of allowing students to explore and construct their cultural identity through music. This is not necessarily straightforward or as easy as simply including music from the countries that your students represent. For a start, the Chinese kid might not like Chinese music. They might not even be familiar with Chinese music, and the same might be said of the Finnish kid. Music's included in many Finnish classrooms, such as Christmas carols and the summer hymn Suvivirsi, are obvious examples of when repertoire selection might exclude certain students. But the same problems might occur with any kind of music with any group of students. Simon Frith has argued that judgments of certain musics as bad, inappropriate or harmful, judgments of certain musics as deviant, are a muddle of aesthetic and ethical judgments, and I think he's right. However, if we understand these judgments as taking place in a multicultural, post-ethical world, the process by which music is understood as deviant is fairly complex. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time explaining how I understand it, and it is quite heavy, so please stick with me. So excluding certain musics from school lessons, and also by implication excludes the students who listen to, identify with, and enjoy those musics, potentially sending them the message, your music is not welcome in school, and neither are you. Similarly, legitimizing musics that offend certain students or contradict their values or beliefs simultaneously sends the message that the school endorses some kinds of music, some values, some beliefs, just not theirs. This also, however, works the other way around. For instance, one teacher I spoke to felt that her own voice was stifled, as though she wasn't allowed to make any reference to or even reveal her own strong commitment to the Catholic faith in a school with increasingly vocal atheist parents. She felt that at least when it came to her religious beliefs, her voice was not legitimized in the school classroom, and a good portion of her musical skill and her knowledge had to be sidelined as a result. So how is it that music becomes a problem? Whose music is considered bad, immoral, or deviant in the classroom? In the 1960s, a sociologist, Howard Becker, put forward a theory called labeling theory, and this approach defined deviance as, quote, behavior which somehow departs from what a group expects to be done or what it considers the desirable way of doing things. In this way, deviance is socially constructed. It involves groups of people creating the rules and applying these rules to certain people, actions, or things like music that stand in opposition to these rules, labeling them as outsiders to the norm, labeling them as deviant. However, if you see this labeling as sort of a one-directional, deterministic action, deviance is pretty arbitrary, particularly in contemporary climates where norms are quickly established and quickly broken, and power relations are arguably more complex and fast-changing than ever before. To attend to this limitation, Edwin Shore reconsidered the means by which something is considered deviant not as a static event, but as a continuous and changing process, a process of becoming, which he called deviantization. So that last three times. Shaw argued that deviantization occurred through what he termed stigma contests. So this concept of stigma contests positions processes of deviantization as the opposite of a dialogical, negotiated, and processual morality. So understood in this way, stigma contests arise as individuals or social groups seek to reinforce the moral boundaries that affirm their own values, their own interests, and worldviews. In this way, deviantization is an attempt to control, an attempt to define what counts as legitimate knowledge, and an attempt to define whose culture counts. Now, in a post-ethical world, these stigma contests are waged by different individuals and social groups with different ideas of which moral boundaries should be established where and when. Deviance is then defined not as merely being what exists outside of socially constructed norms, but as a battery of flexible, interconnected, ideological terms and feelings of disapproval, which are expressed in varying strength, regularity, and openness into practical networks of domination. Stigma contests are then not waged on neutral ground. And in understanding how they operate as competing ideological agendas and highly acculturated terms of moral and political judgment, sociologist Colin Sumner puts forward a theory of social censures. By censure, he refers to the practical process of disapproval and stigmatization which arises so frequently in situations of relational conflict. These censures, he explains, quote, are not just labels or mere words uttered in the heat of the moment, but categories of denunciation or abuse lodged within very complex, historically loaded, practical conflicts and moral debates. Without a stable, monolithic ethical framework, and understanding these censures as the result of stigma contests and moral conflicts, censure theory allows for a more complex understanding of the processes of deviantization. For instance, the role of the deviant person, thing, or action, and the role of those with the power to define them, or that as such as is constantly reconfigured and negotiated according to the power relations embedded in changing political ideologies. For instance, we could think here of Elvis's very famous pelvis. So whereas what John Street says, the guardians of public morality were shaken to their very core with concerns that Elvis's dance moves might rouse the sexual passions of teenage youth, as though they would otherwise be spared. His record sales alone suggest that these concerns were not universal, and his music and his music videos are now included in many a school lesson without second thought. Now that example might seem fairly quaint, but it's not irrelevant for today's music teachers and perhaps contending with twerking in the classrooms the contemporary equivalent. Understanding deviance and morality in this way focuses our attention on the social and interactive ways in which processes of deviantization occur. However, recognizing this is only the very beginning of an inquiry as to what or who constitutes the social in the first place, and how these interactions are manifest in different contexts. Turning back to music education in schools, teachers are then not simply handling one morality against another, but navigating numerous stigma contests, all being waged simultaneously in order to legitimize certain musics, certain knowledge, cultures, and values over others. Some of these overlap and reinforce each other, and others stand in opposition and compete. Without fixed notions of what is appropriate and what is not, without any stable voice of authority to which to turn, the teachers I spoke with noted that it wasn't simply enough to recognize your own moral principles. Constant reflection and deliberation was crucial. As one teacher said, I have to ask myself questions where I'm right and where I'm not right. And what is right? If Finnish schools and others in the Nordic countries are to hold inclusion and participatory democracy as ideals, I suggest that these conflicts and uncertainties that are inherently a part of repertoire selection, making decisions regarding which, or rather whose music, is considered good music may be regarded as resources rather than hindrances to overcome. As Bauman states, living in a post-ethical world means that morality does not vanish, but on the contrary, comes into its own. If then morality is all that there is, the teacher, together with students, is required to recognize and critically reflect upon the historical and cultural ethical baggage that accompanies each music and each situation. If Finnish music education is envisioned as democratic, and that it should provide the opportunities for students to participate and engage in their own learning, the moral deliberation that the teacher is required to engage in is not only restricted into what or whose culture is taught, how it is taught and why. New questions need to be raised, such as what for, who for, and to what ends. In locating the school in a post-ethical world without prescribed rules of moral conduct, or without clear ideas of whose culture counts, the teacher may draw upon disagreement and diversity as moral resources, rather than viewing them as hindrances to ethical consensus. As educational theorist Michael Apple argues, assuming a monopoly of the correct answer, the correct ethical and political stance, endangers the ideals of social justice and equality. These complex, situational moral deliberations that navigate the multiple and complex stigma contests and social censures that enter the classroom require teachers to critique what constitutes a good in the first place, what is socially responsible, what are students' rights. When we speak of inclusion, what is it that students are going to be included in? Why? What for? For who? Without attending to these questions, we risk imposing certain ideas of whose culture counts in the classroom, unquestioningly legitimizing certain musics and values and excluding others. However, by engaging with these questions, particularly in a way that embraces the uncertainty that they engender, and indeed require, we may create new opportunities for student participation yet to be imagined. That's it. Sorry, that was really heavy and really short period of time.
Thank you. Then, questions, comments from the audience? I might have one, but I'm trying to.
Just
Yeah. Vomit out. No, just in relation to this idea that I'm just thinking about what about the usefulness of maybe bringing out more explicitly the bad music, as it were. Would that be an option?
It depends. This is something I work with, and I think critical pedagogy has raised it a lot. Because a lot of music comes into the classroom unexpectedly. The teacher's not in control of everything, especially in Finland, because students often bring their own music to class and they compose. So when your student composes something downright offensive, a lot of critical pedagogy would advise that you sort of use it as a teachable moment and reflect sort of critically together with students on what this means and whatnot. My concerns with that is that it's still you can still do that in a way that's assuming ethical consensus, and then it becomes coercive. So it's a teachable moment so that they think like you. And I think that works not only in sort of offensive cultures, but it can be on composing rhythms correctly, or in any sort of way, critically reflecting on something the student has done in order to lead them to a narrow view of what is the right way to do things. Does that answer the question?
So, yeah, I was content. More?
I'm kind of intrigued by this twerking in schools. Does it happen? I mean, do the teachers, do they have to really... Have have you bumped into this problem?
Literally.
No, it is. What's the right word?
Unintended. I mean, I think that my whole research on this topic started from an experience when I was teaching, and I taught at a public boys' school in Australia. It's a little different system, but generally the public schools there are both boys and girls, but this was specifically for boys who generally got kicked out of everywhere else, I think. And we had a great class going in my year 9, so like 14-year-olds, and they were bringing in their own music. We were doing maybe socially conscious rap, and we had a lot of sort of really critical discussions, and one kid brought in a video by 50 Cent, and I knew the song, so it was like, well, it's kind of controversial, but we sort of discussed this stuff before. It was a festival, and it was a pretty good video, pretty good performance, and halfway through it sort of goes to the crowd, all doing their thing, and one girl in the crowd sees herself on the big screen and is like, so this is why the kid brought in the music video. And all my kids went like mental and had a wonderful time, and I had no idea what to do. I had no idea how, like, I mean, it seems stupid. It's a unit of work on rap music. You're going to deal with some things on sexuality and misogyny and these kinds of things, but I didn't expect it then. So I was sort of going around a very complex way to find guidance for my younger teacher self, I guess. And comforting to find I'm not alone. And I think that it doesn't even have to be that of a big moment. It can be these little things that are, is this okay with the immigrant students whose backgrounds I might not know, but their parents have said some things, and I've seen some things in the news, and I don't know how they work with music, and is it okay if we are doing hymns? And like, it doesn't have to be a popular culture kind of big offence. I think it works on multicultural issues as well. Whenever value systems or perceived value systems seem to miscommunicate or clash.
I interpret your work really that you're moving in that a bit risky area, which is great. That area where in Finland we've accepted that we want teachers to be kind of facilitating students' kind of real interests and engagement with real life and all of that. And it's not simple, and it comes up in many other areas. It's, like you said, it's not just about whether this is unethical or rude or what, but how much are we as teachers willing to kind of question ourselves. And that's a really big thing, an important thing, and this is kind of one slice of it in a way.
Yeah. I mean, this is something that makes Finland quite an interesting case, in that a lot of countries are looking to Finland on how to teach. And I mean, the curriculum for the years I was looking at, so 12 to 15-year-olds-ish, is a page long, which kind of says, teach them a bunch of different musics. It's a bonus if they have fun. Just crudely paraphrased. But and a lot of it is sort of these narratives of empowerment and finding yourself and self-expression through music. But what happens if that expression contradicts the official unsaid values of the school or the community? How do you navigate that as a teacher? Not easily.
Do you find that I mean, of course, there is something specific to music in there. I mean, can you apply what you've been reasoning about to other disciplines? I was thinking, like in any literature, like discovering, I don't know, Pasolini.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I've been thinking about as well. And now I'm sort of moving into research with other arts as well. But I think that if nothing else, it might be highlighted in music. Because music is a performative art, especially in school contexts. And a lot of the teachers I was speaking to said, you know, some things is okay for our class, but we're not performing it in the open day when there's parents and grandmas, and you know, there's different limitations according to where it's being performed. And being such a performative thing in a way, and they also had differences between what they could listen to and what the students could play. Like playing something was seen as much more problematic in a way. It's much more sort of embodied, and it's not just something to critique anymore. From a distance, it's much closer.
And perhaps music is much more classes with consumerism as well, a lot more than many other subjects for teenagers, for example, so you're reading that.
Yeah. So I don't know, I think that there might be a lot of parallels in the visual arts as well. As you're getting to graffiti art, for instance, and things like this. There's a lot of interesting teaching going on in Finland that I know very little about.
All right. Thank you, and thank you to all of us who are still here and who have left. I guess we have now something like 10 minutes until the last session starts, so I hope that there's still coffee and tea available. So.